Welcome to Revenge Heat. My mother stood up at my brother's engagement dinner, tapped her champagne glass with a butter knife, and told 37 people that she had decided to remove me from our late father's estate because, in her words, I had never once put this family first. She said it the way you'd announce a minor schedule change, calmly, clearly, like she had been waiting for the right audience. I was sitting 4 seats away. I heard every word. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up and shout across the breadsticks. I pressed my thumbnail into the inside of my wrist once, very hard, the way I do when I need to stay in my body, and I picked up my phone and opened my notes app. Old habit. I'm a forensic accountant. I document everything. That was 4 months ago. Last Tuesday, my mother's personal attorney left me a voicemail that lasted 47 seconds and ended with the phrase, "We would like to discuss the possibility of reaching a quiet resolution before this goes any further." My brother has stopped returning my calls entirely, and the estate my father spent 31 years building is currently the subject of a formal probate fraud investigation. But before I tell you how 3 documents and 1 conversation with a stranger turned my family's calculated humiliation into the worst decision they ever made, tell me something. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? Because what I'm about to share traveled a long way to find the right ears. I grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona. My father built a mid-sized commercial property management firm from 2 rental units and a truck he bought used in 1989. By the time I was in high school, Carter and Associates managed over 40 properties across 3 counties. My father was not a warm man, but he was a fair one. He believed in work, in keeping your word, and in the idea that his children would inherit equally. He told me that directly, more than once. He used the word equally with the particular emphasis of someone who wanted it remembered. He died of a heart attack 18 months ago. He was 63 years old. He was at the office when it happened, which felt exactly like him. My mother had remarried 6 years before that. A quiet, blurry kind of man named Gerald, who managed her investment accounts and attended family dinners without contributing much to the conversation. My brother, 2 years younger than me, had gone to work at my father's firm straight out of college. He was not especially talented at the work, but he was present, and my father valued presence. I had moved to Denver at 24 for a forensic accounting position, and built a life there. My family interpreted this as abandonment. I interpreted it as having a career. When my father died, his estate went into probate. His longtime attorney, a man I had met exactly twice at holiday dinners, handled the initial filing. I was told the process would take 6 to 8 months. I was told I would be contacted. I was told a lot of things. What I was not told, not until my mother stood up at a restaurant in front of my brother's future in-laws and announced it like a toast, was that she had already petitioned the probate court to modify the distribution terms, claiming that my father had expressed a desire, verbally and informally, to leave his estate primarily to the child who had remained close to the family business. Her words at dinner were the polished version. The legal version, which I would not see until I requested it, was considerably more specific. I drove home that night to my hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while, not crying, just running the numbers, the way my brain does when something doesn't add up. My father had been meticulous. He had an attorney. He had updated documents after his second marriage. The man kept a paper trail the way other people kept photo albums. The idea that he had expressed verbal, informal wishes to redirect his estate sounded nothing like him. It sounded like someone who had access to his paperwork and a reason to rewrite it. The next morning, I made 3 calls. The first was to my father's original estate attorney, the man who had handled his affairs for over 15 years. I introduced myself, reminded him we had met at Christmas dinner in 2019, and asked him directly whether my father had ever communicated any intention to change his distribution terms. There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough to tell me something was wrong before he said a word. He told me he had not drafted any modification to the will. He told me he had, in fact, sent a letter to the court 11 months ago raising concerns about a competing filing submitted by a different attorney. He told me that letter had been acknowledged and, as far as he knew, was still pending review. He asked me if I had retained legal representation. I had not. I did by the afternoon. The second call was to a probate litigation attorney in Phoenix, a woman named Patricia who had been recommended by a colleague. She listened to what I described in about 6 minutes without interrupting and then said, "Send me everything you can get your hands on, and don't talk to your family about any of this until we speak again." The third call was to my father's former bookkeeper, a woman who had worked with him for 11 years before retiring. She picked up on the second ring. When I told her what was happening, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Your father called me 2 weeks before he died." He had asked her, off the record, whether it was unusual for an estate executor to be requesting copies of business valuation documents before the owner had passed. He had seemed unsettled. She had told him to talk to his attorney. She didn't know if he ever had. I typed that conversation into my notes app the moment we hung up. If someone told you that a phone call with a retired bookkeeper might be the thread that unraveled 18 months of carefully constructed paperwork, would you believe it? Sometimes the most important information lives with the person who already moved on and has nothing left to protect. My father's original will was straightforward: equal distribution between his two children, with a provision for a charitable endowment to an engineering scholarship program at his alma mater. The modification that had been submitted to the court told a different story. In the new version, 70% of the liquid estate flowed to my brother. The charitable endowment was reduced to a symbolic amount, and my share was described as having been voluntarily restructured following discussions with the decedent in the final months of his life. My father had been a private man, but he was not a verbal man when it came to legal matters. He believed things should be in writing. He believed handshake deals were for people who liked disappointment. The idea that he had made a major estate decision verbally, with no written record, no letter, no notation in any document, it did not fit the person I had known for 29 years. Patricia agreed. The modification had been filed by an attorney whose name I did not recognize, through a firm that had been incorporated 14 months ago, 2 months before my father died. The timing was not a coincidence. The timing was a schedule. I requested a copy of the full probate filing through the court's public records process. When it arrived, I sat at my kitchen table in Denver with a highlighter and went through it the way I go through fraudulent expense reports. Slowly, looking for the seam where the story stops matching the receipts. It took me 40 minutes to find the first problem. The modification cited a family meeting held at my parents' home in September, approximately 6 weeks before my father's death. According to the filing, my father had expressed his wishes to the assembled family and had indicated he would be formalizing them shortly. The filing listed the people present at this meeting. My name was on the list. I was in Denver in September. I have an airport receipt, a hotel confirmation from a conference in Minneapolis, and 43 time-stamped emails from that week. I was not in Scottsdale. I was not at any meeting. My name had been placed on a document describing an event I had not attended. That is not a clerical error. That is fraud. I forwarded the filing to Patricia with the word September in the subject line and a single question mark. She called me 20 minutes later. Her voice was different, focused in the way that lawyers get when they stop managing your emotions and start managing a case. She told me that fabricating a witness list in a probate proceeding was not just a civil matter. She told me that if we could establish I had not been present, and that my name had been placed on that document without my knowledge, we were potentially looking at criminal fraud. She told me to pull together every piece of documentation I had from that week. She told me not to call my mother. I didn't call my mother. But I did start pulling threads. My father's firm had used the same commercial real estate software for 12 years. It generated automatic logs, client communications, document access, version histories. My brother had been given administrative access when he joined the firm. So had Gerald, my mother's husband, in a capacity that was never fully explained to me but that my father had described vaguely as helping with the transition planning. I did not have access to those logs. But my father's original bookkeeper still had the login credentials from her time with the firm, credentials that had never been deactivated. She was uncomfortable using them herself. She handed them to me and said, "Your father would have wanted someone to look." What I found over the following 2 weeks made the fabricated witness list look like a warm-up. There were document access logs showing Gerald pulling financial valuation files for the firm 6 months before my father's death. Not routine files, valuation files. The kind you assemble when you're preparing for a sale, a transfer, or an estate claim. He had accessed them repeatedly, late at night, from a device that was not registered to the firm's network. There was an internal email chain accessible because my father had CC'd the firm's general inbox on a scheduling note, showing my brother coordinating with the unknown attorney's firm on estate transition strategy, while my father was still alive. The phrase used in one message was, "We need to move before the accountant asks questions." The accountant, in context, was me. I had offered twice in the year before my father died to do a financial review of the firm as a gift. Both times, my brother had said it wasn't necessary. Now I understood why. Here is what it feels like to discover that the people you shared a childhood with spent the last year of your father's life engineering your erasure. It doesn't feel like anger, not at first. It feels like arithmetic, like watching a cream of numbers that you knew were wrong finally reveal the error you'd been looking for. There's a strange, cold clarity to it, and then the clarity cracks, and underneath it is something much older and much louder. My father never knew what they were doing. I am certain of that now. The man who told me equally with that particular emphasis he died, not knowing that the word had already been scheduled for removal. Patricia filed a formal challenge to the probate modification. She included my documentation from September, the document access logs, the email chain, and a sworn statement from my father's original attorney, confirming he had received no instruction to make changes. She also flagged the matter to the Arizona Attorney General's office, which handles probate fraud referrals. While we waited, my family's behavior shifted in a direction I recognized. My mother's texts became careful and short. My brother went from occasional check-ins to total silence. Gerald sent me a LinkedIn connection request, which I declined without comment. A mutual family friend called to say she'd heard I was being difficult about the estate and that my mother was very hurt. I thanked her for letting me know and went back to my spreadsheets. Then my grandmother called. She was 81 years old, my father's mother, a woman who had outlived her husband by 17 years and who communicated primarily through weekly phone calls and the occasional mailed newspaper clipping. She called on a Wednesday evening and said, without preamble, that she had something to tell me that she should have said months ago. My father had visited her 3 weeks before he died. He had been quiet, she said, worried in a way she hadn't seen from him since his first divorce. He had asked her to hold something for him. She had kept it in the cedar box on her dresser since October. It was a letter, handwritten, dated, and addressed to me. She read it to me over the phone in her careful, unhurried way. My father had written that he was concerned about conversations he had been having with Gerald regarding the estate. He had written that he felt pressure he could not name directly. He had written that he wanted me to know, in writing, from his own hand, that his intentions for his estate had not changed and would not change, and that if anything reached me suggesting otherwise, I should trust the original documents and trust Patricia, whose name he had already given me in a letter I had somehow never received because it had been mailed to an address I had moved from 2 years prior. He had known something was wrong. He had tried to leave me a trail. I asked my grandmother to overnight the letter to Patricia. I sat on my kitchen floor for about 20 minutes after I hung up, just breathing, not because I was falling apart, because my father had tried to reach me and I had almost missed it entirely. If your parent left you a message you nearly never found a last quiet attempt to protect you before someone could stop them, what would it cost you to know it had almost disappeared into the wrong hands? Patricia added the letter to the filing. A handwriting expert confirmed it within 3 weeks. The probate court issued a temporary hold on all estate distributions pending the outcome of the investigation. That was when my family started calling. My brother called first. He left a voicemail that started with, "I want to explain," and ended with, "You're going to destroy everything Dad built." My mother called and said she needed me to understand the position she had been in, that Gerald had handled things she hadn't fully understood, that she had only been trying to protect the business. Gerald did not call. Gerald had retained his own attorney. I met my brother for coffee, which was his suggestion, at a place near his office in Scottsdale. He looked tired in the specific way of someone who has not been sleeping because the thing they were avoiding has arrived. He ordered a black coffee and wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't look at me for the first minute. "I didn't know he was going to put your name on that list," he said finally. "The September meeting list." I looked at him. "But you knew there was a list." He said nothing. "You knew the modification was being filed," I said. "You knew it while Dad was alive." You knew I had no idea. He stared at the table. I thought it was legal, he said. Gerald said it was just restructuring. That Dad had agreed to it informally, and they were just formalizing. Your name is in an email, I said. Talking about moving before the accountant asked questions. That's me. You knew what you were participating in. He looked up. His face did something complicated. He was the little brother I had taught to ride a bike in our cul-de-sac. He was also a 31-year-old man who had watched someone forge my name onto a document and said nothing for 18 months. Dad left me more work, he said quietly. More responsibility. I thought he wanted me to have more. I thought maybe that was what he actually wanted. He wanted it equal, I said. He said it out loud, more than once, because he knew someone might need reminding. My brother pressed his fingers against his eyes. I know, he said. So, I'm asking you directly, I said. Not as opposing parties in a legal proceeding. As my brother. Will you tell the truth about what you knew, and when you knew it? He was quiet for a long time. The coffee shop played something low and acoustic. A woman at the next table laughed at something on her phone. Finally, he said, if I cooperate fully, what does that mean for me legally? That's a question for your attorney, I said. But it means you'll have made one honest decision in all of this. It means there's at least that. He nodded slowly. He didn't look relieved. He looked like someone who had just accepted that a thing they had been avoiding was going to happen anyway, and the only real choice left was how to face it. He cooperated. He gave a full statement. He confirmed the timeline, confirmed the coordination with Gerald's preferred attorney, confirmed that my name had been placed on the September witness list without his direct involvement, but with his indirect knowledge. He confirmed that he had received written communication, suggesting the modification would benefit him significantly, and that he had not objected. Gerald's attorney tried to position Gerald as a well-meaning financial advisor who had overstepped, not a fraudster. The probate court examiner did not find that framing persuasive. The fabricated witness list, combined with the document access logs and the timeline of the filing, pointed to a deliberate and coordinated effort to misrepresent the decedent's wishes to a court. That is not an overreach. That is the legal definition of probate fraud. Gerald ultimately reached a settlement agreement that included full restitution to the estate and a significant financial penalty. He did not go to prison, though it was considered. His attorney was more persuasive than his conduct deserved. My mother was found to have had partial knowledge but was judged to have acted primarily under Gerald's guidance. She was required to cooperate fully with the estate restoration and was removed as co-executor. She did not face criminal charges. She did lose a significant portion of the financial cushion she had been counting on. The original will was reinstated. Equal distribution. Exactly as my father had written it. My father's original attorney sent me a handwritten note when the case closed. It said simply, "He would have been glad you looked." I keep it in the same folder as the letter my grandmother mailed me. My brother and I do not have a normal relationship. We talk occasionally, brief and practical, about the estate logistics that still come up. He was honest when it counted. That matters. It doesn't erase the 18 months, but it matters. I don't think reconciliation looks like pretending something didn't happen. I think it looks like two people slowly figuring out what they actually have in common now that the comfortable lies are gone. My mother and I do not speak, not yet. She sent me a letter 4 months after everything resolved. It was 6 pages long and spent most of its length explaining the various pressures she had been under. The word sorry appeared once, in the 4th paragraph, sandwiched between 2 sentences about how difficult my father's death had been for her. I read it twice, put it in a drawer, and thought about it for a few weeks. I'll decide what to do with it when I know what I actually want from her, if anything. Gerald is out of our lives entirely. I will never spend another moment thinking about Gerald. I still live in Denver. I still do forensic accounting, but I've added estate fraud cases to my practice, specifically for adult children who suspect something was changed after a parent died. There are more of them than most people realize. The cases come in steadily. The story is almost always the same. Someone trusted the wrong person with access, and someone else assumed the grieving family wouldn't look too closely. I look closely. That's the thing about growing up in a family that taught you. Your presence didn't count. You learned to document everything. You learn that the paper trail is the only version of events that survives intact when everyone is telling a different story. People sometimes ask me whether it was worth it, whether blowing up the arrangement my mother and Gerald had constructed, knowing it would fracture whatever was left of the family structure, was a decision I stand behind. Here is what I know. My father said equally with intention. He wrote a letter he hoped I would find. He drove to his mother's house 3 weeks before he died and handed her an envelope with my name on it, because he understood that the people he trusted most had already decided to act against his wishes. He did not get to finish the fight himself, but he left me enough to finish it. Standing up for what he actually wanted was not an act of destruction. It was an act of respect. The family arrangement I disrupted was not a family. It was an agreement built on the assumption that I would never look too carefully at the documents and never push back hard enough to matter. It was held together by my absence and my silence. I declined to keep providing both. So I'll ask you the same thing I've been asking myself since that engagement dinner when my mother tapped her champagne glass and said my name like it was something she was discarding. If someone you loved left behind a version of events, and the people around you had already agreed on a different version, one that cost you something real, and built their security on your compliance, how long would you wait before you started asking to see the paperwork? And if the paperwork didn't match the story, what would you be willing to do with what you found? That's not a rhetorical question. I'd genuinely like to know.